What's up, guys? Welcome into another episode of the Call to Act podcast. We are going through a series right now entitled Is Jesus Real? And today we have a very, very special treat for you guys, my buddy, Eric Johnson. I just want to say, first of all, before I roll this episode with Eric as he lays out for you guys from a historical perspective, the person of Jesus, I just want to say thank you to Eric. It took us multiple times connecting and him coming in and recording. We actually recorded this episode several weeks before he recorded the one that we're about to play. And for whatever reason, I go back to look at the video after he got done recording, and it didn't record for whatever reason. So he had to go back and do it a second time. But even before that, I had double booked one time. I was supposed to have him do it one specific Wednesday, and then Kinsey ended up doing it that same Wednesday. And so I felt bad because I'm like, oh man, I double booked. But Eric was just so gracious to come in, not only to reschedule that first time, but then after the video did not record, come in a second time. And so, and I'm so grateful that he did, because the way that he lays out from a historical perspective, the person of Jesus is just beautiful. It's amazing. As I was watching it, I was like, this is exactly like what I needed in my life, and just these reminders of not only things that I've talked about in the first episode where I tried to lay out from a historical perspective who Jesus was, but like listening to Eric, who is a million times smarter than me, and he's more got more wisdom and all of those things, and the way that he's just able to lay it out in a way that we're able to grasp and understand. It's just such a gift to be able to have him on. So I know you guys are going to enjoy this episode. Shout out to you again, Eric. Thank you so very much for just your wisdom, for your just passion for scripture, passion for knowledge. And it's just evident in the way that he speaks and lays it out that God has given him a gift of not only being able to study and research things, but then able to speak them in a way that we're able to easily understand and grasp and learn from. And so shout out to Eric. You guys are going to love this episode. So let's get into it.
All right. Hello, my name is Eric Johnson, and I'm a 7th grade math teacher at Soddy Daisy Middle School here in the beautiful metropolis of Soddy Daisy. And I've looked forward to this for quite some time, and I'm going to be talking about the historical proof of Jesus. And I need to stay with Jesus because I don't want to say Jesus Christ, because even though, yes, I believe in Jesus Christ and the Messiah, the Son of God, I'm just going to try to present some historical facts of why I believe that the person of Jesus was an actual historical figure. I'm not going to bring up theology. I'm not going to bring up anything like that unless it just leads into something naturally. But I'm just going to be more interested in looking at the historical person of Jesus Christ. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed putting it together. So let's take a look at this. And it's going to just go from, there's not going to be any big stories. I'm just going to go right down the line of why I think we can rely upon Jesus being a natural historical figure. The first point I want to bring up is the actual 4 Gospels. They are a historical measure. The Bible is a science book. It is a history book, but more importantly, it is the Word of God. But when it speaks on the things of science and the things of history, it can be trusted. And I do believe that God's Word is the inerrant Word of God. And so I want to look at the 4 Gospels. The 4 Gospels, of course, are a wonderful testimony to the historical person of Jesus. They record his life, they record his actions, they record where he was, where he went, and his life story is portrayed in those Gospels. So number one, even though people would like to say, well, you can't trust the Gospels because, of course, they're going to say that Jesus was real, they are still a historical narrative, a historical story that gives us a wonderful picture of Jesus, and that we could rely upon that as a historical accuracy. I compare that to Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, as we know, had 2 scribes that wrote down everything he did, all of his battles. He would come back from his battles or something that he had done, and he had just would find 2 of his scribes, one of his 2 scribes, and from that point, he would just tell them what happened. Well, that's only 2 scribes, and that is really not a good way at all to present the truth of someone being alive or not being alive, or actual historical figure or not. And so that's why I do think the Gospels are very important. Yes, they back up the Messiah side of Christ, of Jesus, and but more importantly, they are a very good historical narrative. Copies upon copies upon copies of these Gospels have been passed down through the generations. And when you look at the copies of things of other historical figures, they don't even measure up. Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, a lot of the people that we never contemplate whether they were actual historical figures or not, their proof that they were actual historical figures is a lot less than what we have for Christ. And I just want to bring up the four Gospels. I love them and appreciate the life of Christ that they outlined for us. So that's my first part. You may not agree with the Gospels. You may not think they're good theology. You may even think that there's errors within them, but they all give a story of who the person Jesus was, a historical narrative of his relationships while he was here. And the other thing is this: along that time that the Gospels were being written, from that historical perspective, there has never been anything found to contradict that. We haven't found some other book that said Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were all lying, or they were all under some hypnotic state, or they were all drunk, or they all got together and decided to lie. Absolutely not. There is not one historical piece of evidence that contradicts what they said about the existence of a historical Jesus. I find that overwhelming proof positives backing up what the Gospels say. The other thing are the Pauline epistles. Those also are right there, and he was very much involved, although he did not meet Christ or meet Jesus, and was not there at the resurrection, and not there for his ministries. He was around the people that were around him at that time. He knew the apostles. He knew people around them. He knew new converts. He knew the people that hated them. And he persecuted them. And I find it hard to believe that Paul would write the epistles that he has had when he was trying to persecute the church and put down the testimony of Jesus. If Jesus never was a historical figure, then Paul, from the utmost, should have been someone who could say, doing what for what? I'm just persecuting these people and throwing them in jail just because they are of what? If Jesus never was a historical figure, what did it matter? So Paul and all of the people around him in that area knew that Jesus was a historical person. So I think that his epistles live up to that. And again, nothing has ever been found that has ever contradicted what Paul has said about Jesus. Nothing has ever come forward saying that his testimony was false, that he was under the influence of something else. Paul gave a wonderful testimony of who Christ was, who Jesus was. I keep saying Christ, of who Jesus was. And that's that's another wonderful proof that we have that Jesus was an actual historical figure. The other thing I want to bring up, and kind of branching off of this, there have been 3 non-religious studies since the 18th century involving people who garnered other people together and presented a book or a finding upon the historical person of Jesus. I'm going to list the 3 of them. The first one is The Quest of the Historical Jesus. That is by Albert Schweitzer, and that was written in 1906. The other one is The Works of Jesus. It's by Dominique and Robert Funk, and that was written in the late 20th century. There's also Jesus, A Life in Class Conflict by Crosley and Miles in 2023. These are historical perspectives written by people who were not Christians. They may be now, but they were not at the time. And they merely wanted to research and find out, does the historical person of Jesus, did he actually exist? I have read excerpts from Albert Schweitzer and what he wrote, and the proofs that he comes up with are the things that I'm presenting, a lot of them tonight to you. But there have been 3 wonderful, meticulous, methodical outside of Christianity, outside of religion, studies, books printed that go back and prove the true history of Jesus. And I just listed those for you. So here again, has there ever been a conclusive study that has come out and proven that Jesus did not exist? No. Are there skeptics online that say that Jesus never existed? Absolutely they are, but you can find anything online. But when you look at these are peer reviewed, meaning that these were not just some guy at some county bar that decided to write something about some person. These were degreed, these were archaeologists. These were people who were in this field, and they came to the conclusion that Jesus was an actual historical figure. So I think that is huge, a huge feather in the cap of people who believe that Jesus was a historical person. Then I'm also going to talk about, and I should have mentioned this when I was talking about Julius Caesar. No one ever disagrees that Tiberius, the emperor of Rome, existed, or that Alexander the Great existed. But the history of Tiberius is like over 150 years from when he actually existed. The earliest known copy of his history that we know about him being an actual person was printed as a copy of a copy of a copy that was 150 years older than when he was actually alive. And it's even worse for Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, there is 450 years between the time of his death and the earliest copy we have of his existence. But nobody, and I mean nobody, says that Alexander the Great did not exist or that Tiberius did not exist. Now, compare that with Jesus. Some estimates are that we have proof of him in his writings as early as 30 AD. 30 AD, that we can go back all the way from 30 AD, all the way coming towards us to about 70 AD. We have the earliest writings of the history of a person named Jesus. How much more accurate is that about the life of Jesus than of Tiberius and Alexander the Great and of Julius Caesar? And nobody doubts the three of them, or whether they were actual people or not. Nobody does. And we've got more proof about Jesus being an actual historical figure. I also want to mention, this is something that is kind of off the cuff, the Mishnah and the Talmud, which was written and copied in about 150 to 200 AD. Those are written by Jewish fathers at about the time of that they were hearing stories about Jesus. They were in touch with people that were around at the time of Jesus, and they don't actually name him by name, but they talk about his way, what was set forth, the apostles and how they spread, and the teachings that he had. Even though they don't say, I went down and met him, or we interviewed him, or we got this piece of evidence from him, they clearly talk about the life of Jesus. And those are very reliable. Those are some of the earliest Jewish writings that we have on the person of Jesus. And the same thing with I call it the Didache. It's the Didache. It was written in about 70 to 100 AD. It was, again, early Christian leaders that wrote about the Christian life, kind of the way the apostolic fathers and the early church fathers wrote about sending letters to the Corinthians and Galatians and different things like that. These were the same early Christian leaders that wrote about the Christian life. And it does not mention Christ as an actual historical person, but it describes the area around him, and some of the things that we have seen there, we have also seen in our word, in God's word. So all those, the Mishnah, the Talmud, and the Didache is what I call it. I laugh at that because I really don't know how to pronounce it. But all of those point to Christ being an actual historical figure. Let's move forward to today. There's a brilliant man at UNC Chapel Hill, and he's probably the foremost New Testament textual critic outside of Daniel Wallace out of Dallas Theological Seminary, and his name is Bart Ehrman, and a lot of people know him. He's written a lot of books misquoting Jesus and other books that he has written. He is a self-proclaimed atheist, agnostic. I think it depends on what year he answers what critic. But anyway, he was a New Testament theologian, and I'm sorry, not a New Testament theologian. He was a New Testament professor, and he studied under Metzger, Bruce Metzger, who was absolutely the world's foremost expert on the New Testament and how we got our New Testament and the writings, both in Greek and in Latin. So he studied under him, was a Christian at one time, and then renounced his faith. And he says these exact words. He's talking to a group of people, and it's on YouTube, so you can look at this. He says, if you are a professor or an archaeologist or someone who is a studied person, a credentialed person, you do yourself a grave disservice by saying that Jesus never existed. He absolutely existed. This coming from an atheist / agnostic. He says that there's over 9 proofs outside of the Bible, of which I will go over some of those, 9 proofs outside of the Bible that actually confirm the person of Jesus. And he debates a guy named David Price, and David Price is a Jesus historical figure denier. I just made that up. And, but David Price is one of those that argues, that there never was a historical Jesus. And Bart, through that, makes him look pretty foolish. As a matter of fact, he even laughs at him, about the book of Galatians, because he says, come on, David, you've got to at least acknowledge that Paul wrote Galatians. Nothing is more accredited to Paul in the Bible or in the New Testament epistles, than the book of Galatians. Everyone believes that Paul wrote Galatians, and David would not concede that point. Now, here's the critical point. The moderator at the end of the debate, of which Bart mopped the floor with David, presenting his facts against what David Price did, the moderator asked Bart Ehrman, what would it take for you to believe or have more sympathy for the side of the people that believe that Jesus was not a historical figure? And he said, there has to be more credentialed people that come forth and present a lot more proof, because at this point in history, there's absolutely no proof that he was not an actual historical figure. So I thought that was something. You can look at the debate there on YouTube if you would like. We have other things from when Christ was when Jesus was walking the earth. We have archaeological evidences. We have the Pontius Pilate inscription. It's an inscription that was found in Caesarea Maritima. It bears the name of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who, according to both biblical and non-biblical sources, ordered Jesus's execution. We have Caiaphas, the high priest. We have found his ossuaries. They are bone boxes. They were discovered that mention the name Caiaphas, the high priest who presided over the Sanhedrin and tried Jesus. Now, why are those important? Well, they're mentioned in the same context with Jesus, the historical figure, as showing also proof that the people around Jesus also existed, and that Jesus himself, from the other things that I presented, was an actual historical person. The apostolic fathers and early church fathers, and I'm of course talking about Clement I, Justin the Martyr, Polycarp, and many others. Polycarp, we believe, was at the foot of John and was his personal scribe, talking to a person who actually knew Jesus and walked around and was an apostle. And none of these church fathers, and they've written over 1 million quotes. They sent letters to all the churches that Paul did and all the other things, inquiring, wanting to know, essentially doing the same thing that Paul did, except for their writings are not considered inspired. But how in the world do you get a group of men together that came right after the apostles when Jesus, the historical person, was fresh upon the earth, and all of a sudden they're going through all of these theatrics because they want to cover something up, or because they're wanting to lie, or because they're, have some demon possession among them? Absolutely not. These people knew that Jesus was an actual historical figure, and they believed, of course, that he was the Messiah. But more importantly, according to tonight's topic, he was a historical figure, and it cannot be denied. And the church fathers outside of the apostles would have known this. And why would they have gone to the lengths they did to write? I mean, they say that if we took away all of our Greek, all of our Latin manuscripts tomorrow and just brushed them aside, I think there's over 5,600 Greek, and there's Syriac, and there's Latin. I think it's up to 50 some odd thousand now copies of the New Testament that we have. If you took every one of those away and just went on the quotes from the early apostolic fathers and church leaders, you would have enough of them quoting from the Bible that we could almost reconstitute the Bible just upon their quotes from the Bible in their writings to the churches. That's something else. What wonderful proof there that they knew exactly. So my thing is, you're telling me that somebody is going to take all that time to write about somebody who never was a historical figure? Please. That's a wonderful proof too. I love talking about the Catholic Church and the Reformation. That's the things I'm really into now and studying those, and I really enjoy that. And one of the problems with the Catholic Church is its reliance upon relics, sending people who have sinned to pay a penance, and to pay the sacrament of penance, indulgences, and different things like that. And they send them on these quests to these relics. And a lot of them are hokey. A lot of them have horrible stories. As a matter of fact, Erasmus, who put together a Latin Bible, and pointed out several areas where Jerome had not translated properly from the Greek to Latin. Erasmus even comes out and says that if every town in Europe came out with the chunk of wood that they said was a piece of the cross that Christ died on, that you would have enough wood to build a small village. So even Erasmus realized that all these churches, and I mean, they think they have Joseph's trousers and Mary's facial covering and jawbones of saints and the thorns of Christ. They even think they have the sawed up tree of Zacchaeus. And I mean, it just goes on and on and on. But some of those relics, even though they are a little bit hokey, they have wonderful stories going back to this. In other words, in some of the cases, they are so authentic that they came from that time period of when Jesus walked around and where Jesus was alive. And they are very convincing that they at least came from that era and they were about that person. I mean, that to me is another wonderful observance of why Jesus is an actual historical person. I mean, we've got all those relics that go and pay homage to a historical figure that was actually alive and breathing and walking and doing his ministry. And like I said before, some of them are hokey. Some of them are very vague in how they came up with them. Like right now, I think there's 36 nails in cathedrals spread out throughout Europe that claim that they were one of the nails that hung Christ from the cross. I mean, 36. So a lot of those are hoaxes. A lot of those are not. But some of the relics have wonderful stories that go back. And even though you might not know the person that said that this came from Jesus or Mother Mary or Josephus, I'm sorry, not Josephus, Joseph, that is convincing that there was someone there, a historical figure that this came from. And I think that's something else that is very good. Now let's go back to what I was talking about with Bart Ehrman. And I want to read some of these sources. He quotes 9 sources that are exactly who these historical people that wrote, and these are hostile. I call them hostile ancient testimonies related to Jesus. These people were not Christians. These people were not followers of Christ. They did not believe that, but they have wonderful testimonies. Pliny the Younger, he was a ruler, and he writes to a Roman emperor asking how he can handle these people who call themselves and worship this Christus who they look upon as being a god. He writes a letter to the Roman emperor, and we have that today. Suetonius, Jesus was a real man. He was called the Christ, and he caused a Jewish disturbance. Celsus, he said that Jesus was allegedly born of a virgin, father of a carpenter, and had miraculous power. Josephus said that Jesus was a wise man, and quotes his followers, and reported the resurrection. Talmud, he talked about Jesus. He said he was executed the day before the Passover, and that he had magical power. Thallus, Jesus lived, said that Jesus did, in fact, live. Jesus was crucified, and darkness and an earthquake fell over the land. Tacitus called the Christ. He called Jesus, he said that people called him the Christ, talking about Jesus, followers of Christians, and he was executed under Pilate. Bar Seraphon said that Jesus was a wise king. And his teachings remain in effect today. Pelagian said that Jesus predicted the future. Jesus rose after death and showed signs of crucifixion. So what I like about some of these is these are hostile. These were not Christians. They were not Jews. They didn't have any reason in the world to go along with a thought process of let's make Jesus an actual historical figure and then also lay upon him the messiahship. They didn't have any interest in doing that. Those are sources outside of the Bible. So you've got sources outside of the Bible and sources inside of the Bible. And I can go on with some other proofs, but I think that is really it. And I look at this from a historical perspective, and I say nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever been uncovered. Nothing has ever been found. And we find papyrus all over Egypt. A lot of people think that it is stashed away in different areas still to this day, that came out of the Library of Alexandria, which is no longer, and we lost a ton of ancient works, but they're still out there. They're still being found. And I think this is wonderful proof that Jesus was an actual historical figure. But nothing, no dig, no archaeologist has ever found. Nobody's ever produced a paper. Nobody's ever found a book that says anything about anybody that I mentioned tonight pulling your leg, trying to deceive people, having a demon and saying wild things. Absolutely not. Every single one of these things points to the historical veracity of Jesus existing as a historical figure. Those are some reasons of why I feel like there's ample proof that Jesus was a historical figure. And I go one step further. If that is the same historical Jesus that the Bible talks about, which all of this points to that I just went over tonight, if all of that points to that historical figure, then how much more is it to believe that he was God's son, that he was the Messiah, that he came to die on a cross for the sins of mankind? It's not that big of a leap. In other words, people are validating that there was an actual historical Jesus, but we want to separate it from the theology, want to separate it from the miracles, want to separate it from a lot of his wonderful works. But how are you going to come up with someone? Who else were they talking about then at that time but that person of Jesus? Wonderful, wonderful time. I thank Donovan Jones for this, and I also am thankful that he's getting a good night's sleep and that he's enjoying his job and having a good time serving Christ. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'll talk to you sometime later.